I hope you see it on the full screen. So I will be talking about the archives, Estonian Folklore Archives developmental path through different historical periods and the scholarly and ideological shifts in folkloristics. And you will probably also see a certain journey of tradition from oral form into the archive and from there to scholarship and the public sphere. So I hope to highlight how an archive as a living institution changes a bit over time and how durable and adaptable a cultural memory archive can actually be. So that's the basics of the roadmap today. I will touch upon what archives are and what they are not. There are some key concepts and some factors to highlight. That's the introduction of the historical periods I will largely discuss, and some dilemmas, and some conclusions and discussion points if we have time and strength after I've finished. I also have to apologize that I've suffered some cold recently several times, so my voice might break. I'm sorry for that. So I will take some pauses to have a sip of water. So going deeper into this presentation, I would like to point out that archives are a dynamic system. It's not just a collection and it's not a neutral institution. And what's happening in the archive is usually shaped by several factors at the same time, and the factors are changing. And some years ago, we co-wrote an archive with Mari Sarv and Risto Järv. Risto is also here present, about the history and some factors about what has influenced Estonian Folklore Archives, which are ideology, sociocultural needs, institutional status and funding, research paradigms, individual incentives and technologies. And if there are some shifts in history, they usually reconfigure all these 6 factors in some kind of a way. And that in turn produces kind of a new meaning of the archive and for the archive. So definitions first. Archive is a repository of human memory. And this is how we collect, reserve, provide access to. This is the general understanding of what it is. There is also an aspect of it which is public. There is kind of a social agreement that we store certain materials for the future generations and for everyone to use. And there is a certain process in there, how material is selected, how it's mediated, how it's processed and made visible and usable. So the archive, as I said, is more than a repository. It's an institution, it's a practice, and it also provides a space for interpretation. So as Wolfgang Ernst has said, any gaps in the archive are often filled with human imagination because we are humans. So the choices and the organization and the mediation in the archive shape the meaning of the material and also shapes the meaning of the archive. And the archives shape what a cultural memory looks like for a generation after us, or even several generations after us. So according to Jacques Derrida, the archive is linked at the conceptual level to both beginning and command, and refers to the Greek term arche. It's connected to the origin and the authority. So the archive does not simply collect material, it creates an organized corpus and establishes a system of relations at it, and it's really connected to the power of decision. Michel Foucault, as you know, has said that the archive is the law that determines what can be said. And Aleida Assmann has interpreted archive in a very poetic way, in my mind, that the archive is the basis of what can be said in the future about the present when our present has become past.
Yeah,
but basically,
may I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Because we can see only your first slide. Is it
Really?
right? Yes, only the first.
So why isn't it not moving? So you don't see me moving the screen at all?
Yeah, at all.
That's too bad. Does anyone know how to solve this?
If you click to the second slide.
I just did.
What if you just stop translation and then start over again? Maybe it helps.
Let's try.
Okay, I stop sharing and I try again. Let's see.
Maybe you should use mouse to move. Next slide. I have such experience.
And now I can't. Now I can't go. Okay. Can you see a slide which is called roadmap?
Oh no, the same, only the first.
Only the first. That's not good at all.
After you pointed something on the screen, it all just froze. So maybe have you pushed something like oh yeah, now we see it.
Now it's
So you only see it this way. So if I go to the full screen, you see nothing.
Yes, just don't go to the full screen. It always freezes.
Okay, that's very interesting. I've never had this before. But then again, do you now see the right-hand side of the screen where all of you are as well?
Yeah, we see.
Okay, so how to move that? Because I don't think
Can you use your keyboard arrows just or?
I can use my keyboard arrows, but then again, it might be that since I have some notes,
it works.
It works,
okay.
but what I see is that I have a strip of you and me on the right-hand side, so it's kind of killing the screen a bit, and I can't move it to the left, or maybe I can try. Maybe this is the way. Is it too small now?
Smaller. It's smaller.
Okay. What if I do it like this? So you're not on the slides. Can you see it this way?
Looks fine.
Okay.
It's quite good. Yes.
Okay. Because if I start to make the words bigger, it will just cost us a lot of time. So, do you see the slide roadmap?
Yeah, roadmap.
Okay,
yes.
good. So we went to this one and the definitions of the archive. Just to recap, archive means preservation and access across time. Public archive refers to the social responsibility that we have, and execution is the archival choices in action. And then what I was talking about, the archive being more than a repository, is like I said, Wolfgang Ernst has said that any gaps in the archive are often filled with human imagination. He, on the other hand, does not talk about folklore archives. And there are certain choices and organization and mediation happening, and archives determine then which traditions become visible, researchable, and enduring. So we shape the cultural memory. And then I believe this was the last of my point, Derrida, Foucault, and Aleida Assmann. Archives preserve the past as past, as Aleida Assmann says, but it also makes it possible to rediscover it and reinterpret it later on. But she also says that archive is simultaneously a site of knowledge, power, and cultural selection. So what distinguishes a folklore archive? We don't only preserve documents, we also preserve cultural expressions together with a performance and context. So that kind of distinguishes us from history archives, for instance. And that can also create some confusion to others what an archive is. Because when we talk about what an archive is, people think about history archives usually, and not memory archives specifically. Our methods of collection, how we describe it, the systems, how we arrange the material, shape how culture is represented in a folklore archive. So it's a form of ethnographic representation and also a reflection of folkloristics as a discipline. So folklore archive combines the roles of a memory institution, a knowledge production environment, and a public mediator. So again, we are not a neutral institution. We have an agenda. And the second part of these definitions would be black box and knowledge hub. So for the outsiders, we are actually largely a black box. So what we do and how we do it is largely invisible. It's largely not understandable. And inside view is that we are a knowledge hub. We understand what comes in. We understand what we don't want to take in. We understand what the internal workflow is, archivists perhaps more than researchers. And then we also discuss what the outflow is. That can be in cooperation between archivists and researchers, or only a determination and decision of a researcher. How we access it, how it's published, how we counsel on certain topics, and how we reuse the materials. But in doing so, we give our folklore materials new life. So the 6 factors that we discussed in our joint article with Mari and Risto were the ideological framework. So how this political worldview defines what is valuable and permitted to collect and disseminate. What's the general situation with the public? What the local communities want to use, what the general public wants from the archive. What is our funding? What is our position in this institutional hierarchy? What the researchers are interested in and how the world folkloristics influences us. There are also individual choices per person. What an archivist sees as best fit for a certain material and what the researcher sees as the best fit for a material. And of course, the technological advancement in this more than 100 years. So these are the 6 factors that shape how an archive activates and what it does and how it does it. So some of the periodization, the turning points would be then this approximately the middle of 19th century to the independence of Estonian Republic, then of course independence, occupation, and until 1991 when we regained the independence. And there is a kind of a slowing down, not exactly a stop, of what the archive can do in between these shifts in history. And of course, the conflicting interests in different times are what the funders might seem as fit and what the public or the communities want to do with the materials, or how they want to preserve the materials, and what the researchers or archivists want to do with the materials. So when we now go to the history, just a few examples. This would be a title page of manuscript of Friedrich Reinhold Kreutzwald, Estnische Volkslieder. He was a doctor living in Võru in South Estonia, and he was one of those people who was interested in actually collecting folklore, preserving it, and also presenting it and giving it out. And some other examples would be later on, again, for the mind to rest a bit from all the definitions. It's an example of Anna Raudkats and also Armas Otto Väisänen, a Finnish folklorist, collecting in Setomaa, in south corner of Estonia. Anna Raudkats was collecting folk dances a lot. So the collecting work started a lot earlier than our history of archive actually is. So regarding why I started with circa 1850, there is a certain point in history about Estonia. Namely, there was a gradually increasing life expectancy of Estonians, which resulted from improving economic conditions. We weren't slaves anymore. And the Estonians were still not allowed to work in the cities on a mass scale. So there was actually also a migration to the far end of Russian Empire. And the immigration took place actually also in the late 19th century, in the early 20th century, and in many cases, the whole villages actually left Estonia, bringing together their folk culture, their language, their local understanding. There were Estonian communities nearby Estonia and until as far as the Japanese Sea. And that has also affected how folklore was collected later on. So in the 19th century, there was an ideology, a public need for folklore collecting, which took place as part of nation building under colonial suppression. And there was the participation was offered as a personal input into national processes. The 19th and early 20th century saw a number of activities which were instrumental in the formation of Estonian folkloristics and the establishment of Central Folklore Archive. The study of folklore in Estonia was inspired by Herder, as elsewhere, and the German Estophile scholars and naturalists who played a significant role in this field in Estonia. The rise and activities of the humanities societies, such as the Estonian Learned Society and the Society of Estonian Literati, are also important, as you could see from Kreutzwald's slide. If I go back to it just for a moment, that is a part of this Estonian Learned Society's collection. The initial folklore collections and research activities were characterized by romantic nationalism, and the development of Estonian folkloristics was influenced by foreign language academics, particularly Finnish, and Finland plays a big part in Estonian Folklore Archives history. The national awakening movements of the 19th century precipitated by an increased awareness of the significance of traditional culture served to define the local national identity. And the individual agency was mostly done by Jakob Hurt with his nationwide campaign in 1888 until his death in 1907. and he had approximately 1,400 correspondents. So the beginning of folklore studies is placed in the period of Estonian national consolidation from the mid-19th century, when Jakob Hurt initiated several large-scale collecting campaigns for Estonian folklore and published works on folklore in Estonian and German. His early questionnaires called for folklore to be documented precisely in the local dialect and word for word, and his system of organizing manuscripts has remained influential for Estonian folklore collections. Later, Oskar Looritz continued Hurt's system, so it's actually a very important point again in the history of EFA. And Hurt's understanding of what folklore is was extremely broad. And as I usually mention to people, then he had some fights with other pastors. Also, my colleague Katre Kikas has researched Hurt and his correspondence a lot, and she has said this as well, that Hurt had to defend his very broad understanding of what folklore is, because he also included folk medicine and all those kind of bad things, folk belief, and pastors did not like it. But because Hurt stood firm in his conviction that we have to collect as broadly as possible, thanks to that, we have a very, very rich collection. And of course, another pillar for us is Mattias Johan Eisen. He concentrated on narratives and short forms and published popular books. And Oskar Kallas, who initiated melody collecting and put a lot of effort in notation skills, which was very rare, because when Hurt had a lot of correspondents who even learned how to write and read, then noting down folk melodies required higher education. And those people who were able to do that, they usually studied in St. Petersburg at the time. And there were indeed a very few people. And just going back a little bit, so there was limited funding and technologies, as you can see here, written down very shortly. It was done by hand, post service involved, books printed, newspapers printed. Hurt corresponded with his correspondence via mail, snail mail, and via press. And the earliest technology, as you know, is phonograph, and the earliest recordings for us are Armas Otto Väisanen's from 1912, if I'm not entirely mistaken. So on the left here, you can see Jakob Hurt's collection, nicely brown. And on the right here is Mattias Johan Eisen's, which preserves like this only on photographs now. It's been restored, put into boxes, because Eisen's collection was put together somewhat unsystematically in comparison to Hurt, who had 4 different manuscript sizes. In Eisen's collections, the papers were as they were, and it had suffered quite a bit during the years. And also some of the manuscripts of Jakob Hurt do not look so nice again. They are put into archival boxes, and they are not given to researchers for quite a long time. They are digitized and preserved in this way. So when we move to the independence era, it's important to note that after Jakob Hurt's death, his folklore collections were located in Helsinki at the SKS until 1927. And the idea to bring back Hurt's collections was raised by university docent Eduard Denman from the Faculty of Religion in 1922. What followed was a very long discussion and some hurdles, and then it was actually Oskar Looritz who was finishing his PhD in 1926, and he devoted himself to the establishment of EFA, and was main force behind the actual battle with bureaucracy and ministry, which took a more permanent form in 1924 and finalized later in September 1927. But the formation of this idea is also attributed to Walter Anderson and Karl Kroon and Matthias Johann Eisen. So it was not only just Oskar Looritz. Then this establishment of Estonian Folklore Archives took place under the Estonian National Museum, which was founded in 1909, also based on Jakob Hurt's collection. And we are very lucky that when Looritz managed to induce the foundation of Estonian Folklore Archives and managed to bring back Hurt's collection from Helsinki, that our collections have stayed in the same house near the center of Tartu city for 100 years, minus the war times when the whole house was re-evacuated because of the war. So we are extremely lucky in that sense. Usually folklore archives have had to move a lot. In the early years of the Estonian Republic, in 1919 and 1920, the University of Tartu was established as an Estonian language university, and folkloristics and ethnology in Estonian context were taught separately from the beginning, so they were not seen as one discipline. I refer to folklorist Tiiu Jaago, who says that the study of ethnography or ethnology was based on history, and at first was closely related to anthropology and even historical geography. And then folkloristics, on the other hand, was in part of philology, and despite its connection with literary studies, there was a separate chair of Estonian and comparative folklore established in 1919, so very early on. Ethnographers didn't have such luck. The department was established kind of in 1919, but it took until 1923 before the actual courses could begin. And what connects university and our institution is, of course, that many students came to the archive. They became folklorists, they became researchers. Oskar Looritz taught in the university, and this connection continues until this day. At the end of 1930s, the network of voluntary correspondence was established. There were guidelines and questionnaires published. And they also created a tradition to hold gatherings together with correspondents and kind of organize some knowledge sharing, how to collect and why and what. And some brochures were also published at the time. So in this way, there was a connection with communities, providing the information, and it was maintained. And as Inna said in the introduction, Looritz actually managed to approach the head of state at the time, Konstantin Päts, which finally resulted in this foundation of Presidential Award for Best Folklore Collectors, which lasted for about 4 or 5 years. Then there was a long pause, and then re-established again in 1994 and given out since 1995. But going back to the origins, they did not only place attention to Estonian folklore and the white spots of Estonian folklore that were lacking, but also there was attention put to representatives of other people living in Estonia, or other nations rather. Swedes, for instance, Russians, Gypsies, Germans, Jews, and so on. And during this interwar period, the scientific research had a very high status in Estonian society, not from the beginning, but up until the 1940s, it just gradually grew in significance. And scientific research served the newly independent country by supporting the national self-image. But the state priorities and the proper funding system was barely established right before Soviet forces occupied Estonia. So what was built up in about 20 years, they demolished very, very quickly. And some examples again, there was a wide initiative in the Nordic countries. I'm not sure about Ukraine in 1930s to collect children's folklore. So this is just one short example of this. And there were other kind of these waves of same topics between different folklore archives in Nordic and Baltic countries. So a lot of the collecting themes are very similar. Can you comment actually what was happening in Ukraine in 1930s? Did you have this wave of collecting children's folklore, children's games, stories, or not? Just out of interest. Do you know?
Дорогі колеги, хто може дати відповідь? Чи в 34-35 році збирався фольклор, дитячий фольклор в Україні?
Так, збирався. Збирався в музеї Слобідської України імені Григорія Савича Сковороди, це Харків. Yes, yes, it was in the Kharkiv. It was.
Yeah. So it's probably a wider idea that.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you. Good to know. And since time is flying, let's move on with the history, and we enter the war times and occupation. So even in the Soviet Union, the scientific researchers served the country and generally enjoyed a favorable reputation. But folklore research, it didn't actually stop, and folklore archive didn't really stop. But as I said, there was this interruption happening because of the very, very severe shift. After the Soviet occupation in 1940, the political and cultural reorganization took place at all levels, in all places. I'm sure it's the same story in Ukraine, including then the memory institutions and their functioning. And the Estonian National Museum, under which Estonian Folklore Archives operated thus far, was split into two. On September 11th, 1940, the departments responsible for the intangible heritage, which were located in Aia, or what is now in Vanemuise Street, in this very building, were reorganized into the State Literary Museum, following a model existing in the Soviet Union. And the rest of the museum was renamed the State Ethnographic Museum, remaining at its location in Raadi Manor, just on the outskirts of Tartu, where it's also now with their new building. And then there were several renaming of the departments as well. For a while, we were under German occupation, so we had a different name, and under Soviet occupation, we had a different name, and the Literary Museum in general had different versions of the name, so it was a big mess, as in the Soviet Union, usually. So during this political turmoil, when the country was occupied and restructured several times, the normal folklore collecting and research slowed down. In 1992, it was the museum was dissolved by the German occupying forces. And then when the Germans left, or they had to flee in 1944, 43, actually, the whole building was evacuated into different locations all over Estonia, into churches, into other different hiding places. And then there were different people who were guarding all these belongings. And there was it was difficult at that time. And the State Literary Museum under Soviet occupation was reopened again on November 6, 1945, although the actual work had been going on since already early fall. And then the museum was renamed again, and the folklore department, or the folklore archive, became a folklore department of the State Literary Museum. And after the war, the situation in folkloristics was somewhat problematic. Walter Anderson from the university had moved to Germany. Oskar Loritz was exiled, or he ran to Sweden. Some folklorists working for the archives, such as Rudolf Põldmäe and Herbert Tampere, and even literary scholar August Annist, was imprisoned. And that shift in people, in the staff, really affected the work for the years to come. So there were certain topics that were avoided, for instance, folk belief, folk religion, and the very, very heavy times psychologically was censoring the folklore collections in late 1940s, early 1950s for the anti-Soviet and Christian and sexual folklore and anything that could refer to earlier bourgeoisie times or the earlier republic. Oskar Loritz's name was crossed down in manuscripts, and as Kaisa Langer has shown in her research, that it created kind of gaps in these manuscripts, because sometimes the folklore pieces or names were not just crossed out. It was lucky if they were glued over with something, but they were also cut out. And these cutouts from the manuscripts were stored in a separate fund, which then was not accessible for everyone. There was inevitable break in this correspondent communication. The network was disbanded, and then it had to be revitalized again. It happened mainly in 1950s, where the situation stabilized a lot, especially after Stalin died. When I have read through the protocols or the minutes of different department meetings and department heads meetings, there is a very, very significant shift in the psychological atmosphere. So up until 1954, I would say, there was this really depressive mood coming out of these minutes. And a year after Stalin dies, suddenly there is a shift, mental shift in these notes, and people talk about everyday life in a totally different manner. So it's very interesting. It's very hard to translate it actually into words, but when you read these minutes before Stalin's death and afterwards, there is a very, very significant shift in people's minds, and they were not afraid anymore. And it shows in the minutes as well, in the in-house minutes. So it's very interesting reading. And of course, during Soviet times, the technology changed from pen and paper to typewriters and tape recorders, even though everything was scarce, as you know very well, there were limited carriers. There was a renewed cooperation with Estonian Radio, who also helped with equipment. For a while, Estonian Literary Museum even had a bus to go to field work, which were very extensive, lasted for a month. They were also organized between other institutions. And then also video recording appeared because cameras appeared. So just some examples, again, from fieldwork, from Kuremäe, for instance, northeastern Estonia. The old version of collecting folklore, and then some photographs about filming folklore. And I'm sure when you look at these pictures, you have some parallels with Ukrainian folkloristic history. For instance, I was thinking, when I was compiling these slides, I was thinking that a few years ago, Latvian Folklore Archives celebrated their centennial, and I invited them to create a photo exhibition in our archive, but based on their folklore materials, their photo materials. And what my colleagues said very often, and I saw as well, that somehow the atmosphere is the same, the clothes are very similar, the haircut is very similar, but at the same time it's a little bit different. So I assume you might see the same from these images from just the Ukrainian perspective, that something is very much the same and at the same time very much different. This is an image of Olav Kiis, who was a sound engineer for a while. And I'm sure you had a similar type of tape recorder in Ukraine as well. So moving closer to today. By the end of the 1980s, the dominant view in Soviet Union was that in a socialist society, it was possible to direct and manage scientific development according to a plan. And as a novelty, state science policy had to prioritize basic research to strengthen its experimental base and pool resources, and rapidly apply new scientific solutions to the development of technologies. And all that had to be in the service of Soviet order and communism. And although the Soviet research system had expanded exponentially from the 1960s onwards, it had reached its limits by the mid-1980s. The humanities and social sciences in Estonia were able to gain a little more attention in this perestroika atmosphere and glasnost in the late 1980s. And the research policy took a very different turn when the Soviet Union collapsed, as the financing of Estonian research abruptly stopped. And the whole research system actually faced a very, very difficult situation. And on August 20th, 1991, the Estonian Republic was regained its independence. And the Baltic states in general had some advantages compared to several other former Soviet republics. For us in the Baltics, the communism had only lasted for 2 generations. So the Baltic nations had retained a historical memory of their independence during the interwar period, and this memory was then carried on a lot, and a very strong cultural identity based on that memory. And one of these pillars was, of course, national culture. But the problem was with this abrupt loss of Soviet financing of the situation, that the Bank of Estonia kept a very tight rein on the money supply to tame inflation, and it meant that the country took a very sharp economic downturn in the first half of the 1990s. At the same time, a lot of the institutional structure was reorganized. Literary Museum belonged to the system of Academy of Sciences. And in Estonia, that Academy of Sciences was completely restructured. It didn't serve the country in the Soviet way anymore. It became kind of an assembly of academics. So we kind of lost this touch as well. I forgot to mention that during the Soviet era, the archivists were not actually allowed to do research. They were more in the position of a serving institution. They had to prepare, organize the archival material and present it to any kind of researchers and do the public work from the perspective of communism. But when Estonia regained its independence, then this wish to continue actual research, which had not died out at all, and research was done when possible, it kind of exploded, I suppose, and the archival side perhaps lessened a bit thanks to that. But it depends on who's viewing it, of course. So Ingrid Rüütala, a very well-known ethnomusicologist, has pointed out that while the national awakening of the Estonians in the 19th century gave rise, among other things, to the tradition of song festivals, then this regaining of independence was accompanied by a widespread rise of the folklore movement several decades earlier, already in the 1960s, 70s, actually. But the closer to the 1990s, that meant for the folklore archive that more communities, more groups wanted to have this authentic material from folklore archives to learn from it, to reuse it, and to interpret it. So it kind of stresses the importance of a folklore archive very, very explicitly. So in this constantly changing political situation and in the wave of the strong independence movement, already towards the end of the 1980s, Estonian folklorists found it possible to record and study previously forbidden or suppressed folklore topics such as soldiers' folklore, students' folklore, even children's folklore. And in the latter, the influence and cooperation of Finnish colleagues played a very, very important role, because thanks to Finnish colleagues, the children's folklore collections were reignited once again and take place every now and then again until today. And from the 1990s onwards, since computers came as tools, then this media folklore and online folklore, of course, gained more and more prominence. It was a novelty at that time, and now it's normality. And moving then closer to today, to 21st century, of course, digitization takes over. We have our file repository Kivike, which holds a certain part of 4 different archives. The main are Archival Library, the Cultural History Archives, and then Estonian Folklore Archives, and to a small extent also the Folklore Department's research archive that they have. Under Kivike, we have different web gates, and then depending on researchers' interests, a lot of databases have been born as well, which is from one side really good because you can have these very specific databases, but technologically it's a headache because technology ages faster and faster. So to put all these older databases together into something meaningful and usable now is very, very difficult. I'm not the right person to talk about it. I think I saw N, who is our photo archivist here, can talk a lot more about it than Risto. But it's really a challenge because from the point of view of funders, you apply for a project, you get money, you do this bit, and you should be happy. But from a folklore archives perspective, it's not helping really anything because you have to make a really harsh choice what you do with the material and how you build up the database in the full knowledge that in a few years it's more or less unusable because the technology has moved on already. So you're already behind everything. So it's a challenge. So the new dilemmas pointed out here are this digital open access, which increases our responsibility actually, since not all data is suitable for wide public use. These fast changing carriers and software change, and of course the changing users' rights in folklore archives context as well as in research context. So again, some photos. I'm nearing the end, don't worry. This is an example of Kivike, our virtual repository. And then some fieldwork photos. Our colleague Jüri Metsalu is filming a sacrificial stone. Then, of course, a lot of folklore is digital nowadays or collected digitally through our CRAT system. And of course, we haven't abolished the pen and paper as well. It's still there. And since it's all digital and everything else is, we need to be accessible, is my point. Then we, of course, have Facebook, we have Instagram, and we also have a YouTube channel to interact with our audiences. And especially in Corona times, we published our video lectures on our YouTube channel. And we even have, since we have an annual gathering of folklore collectors every year, and the president comes to give out its award, then we had one event which was actually digital. It was only on YouTube, and we could not come together in person. But talking about some happier events, since Tartu was European Capital of Culture in 2024, then we had for several years a project to create a web anthology of Estonian nature folklore. It was led by our renowned ethnomusicologist Ave Gorsic. It was launched in September 23. It's still being quietly updated, and the idea was that the nature folklore would be translated into English, because it's usually very difficult to give out folklore material in other languages. It requires very good translating skills. And we also had the material presented there in South Estonian local languages or dialects. So it was basically a 4-language web anthology. But the most important thing in the perspective of the wider world and in context of the European Capital of Culture was that this material that was sought out and put into this web anthology would be translated into English. And I have this link here. You can go and check it out. But another part of this same project was an exhibition. So it was called Enter Woodland Spirits, staging the values. The project was called Enter Woodland Spirits, but from our perspective, it was kind of staging the values of folklore material and folklore archives, because we wanted to bring out what's actually valuable from our materials. And then we had the head of exhibition project, Evelyn Raudsepp, art curator, who with her partner sought out 22 artists from Baltic and Nordic countries, who then approached our folklore material from the web anthology, or they approached their own folklore from their own countries, and then created this digital art exhibition. This is Phantom, that stayed in our house for quite some time. We rented it from Marilyn Keepley. And I would like to point out some of the challenges that come with presenting our own material in this way. While we were preparing for this Capital of Culture program, me and Taive went through 1 year of preparation when we wrote the project bit by bit. And there was a kind of a renegotiation after a certain period every time. We wrote the bit, and then we went back to the organizers and they gave their feedback. So it was very good to hear that our project was had a strong core idea with very good potential. But what really kind of stunned us was the feedback that we are trying to finance our daily activities with this project. So it was a very good example of this black box. We tried to approach from our knowledge hub perspective, and we encountered knowledge that we don't know what to do. So it was probably one of the most important lessons of this project. Another challenge was that it was done in 2 buildings. And we had, for instance, some mushrooms growing in the building, so the humid air was in very close proximity with card catalogs, so that was a potential risk. And psychologically, for the people in our house, it was very difficult perhaps to bear constant sounds coming from certain places, from certain artworks, which was non-stop from 10 until 6 o'clock during the summer months. And of course, to create this one project, it was necessary to write multiple funding applications, which again complicated the whole thing. But there was an achievement. We got our Oscar, and the project was given the highest award of the culture event of the year in Tartu 2024. And what we do today in this digitalization and AI era, thanks to Mari Sarv, we have this Estonian research and culture data infrastructure. I think maybe Inna even knows more about it because she participated in a hackathon organized by Mari and Kaisa just recently, so she can give you her own experience, how this is. I'm not part of ETCAT, so I don't know the inner works of it. But it basically introduces the stages of the researcher's workflow for the outer public, but it also provides an overview of what kind of data collections we have. And then in the end, it should offer critical tools for the research to use for their research and for presenting their research for the wider public. So again, looking back at the 6-factor lens that Mari and Risto and I talked about, and from the digitization perspective, all the 6 factors also apply to this digitization thing. Open access requires certain infrastructure, certain long-term maintenance. They have to be longer than just project cycles. It means that there is certain kind of ethics involved in this. You have to make a decision what is public, what is not, and how well it's protected, because apparently we also have Chinese bot going into Kivike and trying to dig into that. And technology gives solutions, but it also kind of creates new problems, as you know yourself. The carriers and the software change very quickly. There is an abundance of digital-born materials, and there are new tools. So this is our nowadays, and this is our future. We have to live with that. It's not going anywhere. But I want very briefly to talk about a different kind of AI. And that's the competent archive user, which was discussed by Elizabeth Jakel and Deborah Torres 20 years ago, meaning the ability to work effectively and critically with archival sources and systems for the user. So they kind of look at the aspect that those who use the archive need to have some kind of knowledge what an archive is, what the practice is, and what the procedure is. They did their own research, not in folklore archives, but what they came out with is that users need some guidance. They need rather clear guidance. And this is kind of an archival literacy that needs to be developed over time. They were comparing in their research archival users with museum users. And apparently in this American context, museum users were somehow more at home in going between these how to search material in museums. And in the case of archives, there was, according to their research, a lot more confusion. So again, maybe Enn knows more about this than I do, and certainly Kadri Tamm, our senior archivist, in how to give knowledge to the archival user, how to approach the material. And of course, our Kivike has a guideline section how to use Kivike and how to search from there, but it can still create a lot of confusion. So I think it's very important not to forget that those who use archives need some communication as well and some clear guidance. So that's the AI we usually don't think about. And just to come to the end, I would like to very shortly present the heads of Estonian Folklore Archives. On the top right hand, here you see Oskar Loorits, it's Herbert Tampere, Ottilia Kõiva, Ellen Liiv, Anu Korb, Ergo Hartvestrik, and of course Risto, who is hopefully still there. So we have 13 heads from different times who have run the department, and it's great that they are there. And then I better come to the conclusions. What are the dilemmas that are present in all the periods of the history of Estonian archives? It's this public versus personal. What the archival research has to think about is their own research agenda, but also what the public wants, and the archivists probably are the same. And then there is public expectations and funders' expectations, what the ministries and programs allow us to do, what they enable us to do. And then this open action and protection, which is probably the hugest thing next to funding, how we make heritage accessible and at the same time protect the material and the informants. I don't think it's like a black and white answer, never. Yeah, there is this local international theme and also this temporal friction when there are shifts between different political eras, then the archival work kind of slows down. But what has happened in Literary Museum in recent years, we have an archives council operating since 3 years now. And the goal of that council is to solve ongoing problems in the core activities, the archival work, and to develop the institution's core archival services, update archival documentation, and perform other similar tasks, so that there would be a group of people coordinating between the 3 major archives in our house, because that, how do you put it? It also determines the way the public sees us. And if we are somehow very difficult to understand what we represent and what can be found in our archives, then the public does not understand us. Therefore, the funders don't understand us. So at least in the interface, either digital or physical, we have to be able to present one clear idea of what we are so that we are not misunderstood. So basically what I said, we have to make the black box, but partially visible at least. We have to have continuous presentations for the public, meetings with local contributors. We have a new user rights document accompanying all surveys. We have this negotiation work with communities and about technical points inside and outside. We acknowledge that digitization is a long-term thing. It's not a project-based thing. And with internet age, there is a very clear shift that archive is no longer a physical thing, but it's also a digital thing. As Wolfgang says, it's no longer the location of the data that matters, but rather when and how it can be accessed. And that applies to folklore archives as well. And from the feedback of our Enter Woodland Spirits exhibition, I'd like to point out 2 things from the media that caught my eye. There is one person, Andrus Laansalu, who says that all these old texts and sound recordings want to breathe. They want to talk and they want to do something, giving value to them. And Michael Cole, who was Estonian broadcast's correspondent, points out that this there is this fear of loss, and that plays into this preserving of our cultural memory, of our folklore memory. And I think you know more about this than I do, since your cultural memory is a direct target in the war situation. But in conclusion, Estonian Folklore Archives is not merely a repository of the past. It's a dynamic and ethically grounded cultural mediator. We interpret, we contextualize, we bring life to the heritage again, and we try to understand the contemporary society, and in the hope that the society will also understand who we are. So my voice is gone.